Hey there, podcast listeners. This is Corbett Lunsford, your host. This special episode of the Building Performance Podcast is from last year's Fall Fast Track, which is my annual 6-week mastermind course with people all over the world, all about profiting from home performance. If you'd like to learn more and pre-register for free for the 2015 Fall Fast Track, you can do that at HomePerformance.training. Enjoy.
A rising tide lifts all boats. Fall Fast Track.
Today we're talking with Bill Spohn, who is the owner and president of TruTech Tools, and James Bergmann, who is the director of product development at Stride Tool. You guys, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome.
Bill, let me have you answer this first. You have been in the diagnostic tool industry, and your name is on patents. You've been designing tools. How has the evolution of diagnostic equipment come in your career in the industry?
Well, I've seen the equipment become easier to use, lighter weight and more compact, and more feature-rich. But I think along with the feature richness comes sort of the complexity in how someone actually uses and delves into all those features that are in the product.
So you're saying maybe the technology actually is hurting a little bit because, of course, the contractors that we're trying to get to use these things are not necessarily the most tech-savvy crowd.
Yeah, they need some background education, some information. They need to do some instruction on their own in order to be able to use the product and get the most out of their investment.
Jim, let me flip it over to you because you're, in case the listeners don't know, your newest product, the iManifold, is perhaps the most high-tech tool that's ever been seen by the HVAC industry, which is notoriously difficult to adapt to new things. How has the adaptation to your amazing software-based tool been going?
Well, the challenge, if you look at the industry as a whole, there's been two challenges, and they're both have come up in the iManifold. Probably the biggest challenge has been, first of all, how to make an accurate measurement, and then knowing what to do with the measurement once you've made it. And that was two things that we really tried to address when developing the iManifold product. Particularly what we were concerned with was the fact that obviously if you don't get a good measurement, a high-quality measurement, then you can't get good test results because everything that we do as an HVAC technician or building performance, everything that we do comes down to measurements and then understanding is that measurement acceptable or not, and then what are we going to do with it now that we have it. And so part of the challenge with the iManifold was trying to figure out how we were going to relay that, what do I do with the measurement, back to the technician. And it's been very, very interesting watching the technicians evolve as they've used our product. Probably the most interesting thing is we got away from some of the digital elements of the instrument. And the digital technology is really cool, but when we switched from analog to digital, we lost a lot of information that was hidden behind needles and trends and things that we could no longer see simply because looking at numbers, your brain can't realize them that fast. And so what we found is we needed to have a new way of not only making an accurate measurement, but also to convey that measurement back to the technician and then to show them when the measurements were outside of an acceptable range. So doing that in the iManifold has been very successful, but it's also been a challenge for technicians of understanding when they get on different types of equipment, how do they determine how that piece of equipment should operate or what type of equipment it even is. So there's always been challenges along the way, and I 13 years in education, when Bill and I first met, one of the first things we talked about was actually this problem in the instrumentation industry. Both of us at the time worked for Testo. Is technicians had great instrumentation or access to great instrumentation, but didn't know what to do with the measurements. And I think that's the biggest challenge we've run across in the industry today.
Interesting. So, and I know that you guys, I mean, frankly, both of you are the people that I turn to when I have a question about technical stuff to do with tools. You've both been presenting and writing articles for a long, long time, trying to get people to use the tools that they already own. So aside from not knowing what to expect and how to get the accurate measurement, are there other psychological reasons that people don't test?
I can speak to that. I think sometimes maybe they're afraid of what they're going to find out. And they may also have certain lack of experience in conducting what the diagnostic test is, and just they've seen someone else do it, they've seen wonderful results, they've read about it, but they just have to kind of overcome that barrier and say, yes, I can do it. I've been coached enough. I got to go out there and, I might make some mistakes, but there's that phrase, fail fast. The quicker you get over and overcome those mistakes that everyone's going to make going through the process, the better off you're going to be.
Mm-hmm. Getting started is always harder than keeping on going.
Right.
So as far as our clients go, the people who are hiring us, whether it's a building management company or a developing firm or a homeowner, why don't those people by now understand? Like, I'll give you an analogy. My buddy John went to a mechanic because his horn didn't work, and the guy said, "Oh, we'll run some diagnostics." And he came back the next day, and the guy said, "Yeah, we ran some diagnostics, and we found out that the horn doesn't work." And he's like, "That's not a diagnostic." So why don't people actually expect diagnostics at this point? We've all got computers that we take to the high-tech people who plug it in and do special processes and stuff on it. Aren't we used to this by now?
Perhaps it's that in this industry, people don't think of the house as a collection of technology and science. They think of the house as just a place they live. So they don't realize that there are technology and systems built into the house. I think it might be just consumer awareness and consumers across the broad spectrum, which include those builders and architects and things like that. Information on this, awareness is definitely up from the time I entered the industry, but it's still not there and at the core of the consciousness of the industry.
Jim, how about you?
Yeah, well, I think that the biggest, the way I would identify this is what I would call appliance fixation. And so what that means is a lot of technicians are so fixated on just the appliance, on just the furnace or just the air conditioner or just the ductwork or just the roof or just the insulation or just the windows that they forget that all of these things interact as a system. And it's really the first time in our history that we've appreciated how some of the other subsystems of a house affect the performance of the system that we're working on. And we just simply haven't done any performance testing in any large volume. Obviously there's been people that have been on this bandwagon for over 20 years that have done building performance testing, but they've been a small minority compared to the masses out there that have really fixated on the appliance and tried to fix everything from poor system operation from the appliance standpoint. So appliances have been failing, we've been changing parts. Appliances aren't putting out enough heat, we're adjusting the blower at the furnace. We're not looking at the impact of the entire system performance. We're not looking at, is there enough insulation in the room? Is the room properly sealed? Does it have a correct amount of return air? All of the elements that we should be looking at to quantify performance. And that goes as far back in the HVAC industry as you want to go. And, it even happens if you look at the construction industry. If a room's not heating properly, who's the first person they're going to call? It's your heating contractor. They're not going to call a window guy and say, "Hey, are these windows put in properly? Are they air sealed?" Or the insulation guy to see if his insulation's correct, or or any of the other trades. They're looking to the heating guy to solve all the problems. And the heating contractors in general haven't been as well educated about systems, specifically the building as a system, as the appliance itself.
Jim, let me stick with you for a minute. So as somebody who's recently designed a tool, the iManifold, which tells you not only the results of the test, it can tell you how to hook up the test because it's got the special help features and all that stuff. And also at the end, it'll tell you how to analyze the results that you got. Is it possible for a tool to actually do that whole system analysis that we're talking about, or are people still going to be necessary at every point to be experienced and know what they're doing to take the diagnostic tools and use them in a special way that actually will mean something?
Well, if you think about it, it's the technicians will always be needed. And what the concept behind the iManifold is if I can teach a technician how to make a good measurement, then the tool can do very accurate diagnostics. And that goes back, if you think about just going into your doctor, Your doctor takes your temperature at two very specific locations typically, right? And either orally or at the other end. So, but
I'm glad. Thank you for specifying that.
I wanted to make sure we're talking the same thing here. So, if your body temperature is not correct, your doctor knows based upon what your internal core temperature should be that there's something wrong. Maybe you have an infection or something like that. And we need to teach technicians much the same way. It's not just the fact that you have a tool that makes measurements. It's also how the measurement's made that matters. And so part of the challenge with the iManifold or any product like it or any to test digital instrumentation is what in some cases what we've done is we've simply made technicians take bad measurements faster, because all they're doing is now digitally or very efficiently putting a probe in a wrong location, getting a bad measurement, and then making bad judgments on how to repair the system from that point. With the iManifold specifically, if you put the probes in the correct locations and you do the testing properly, and I've got 25 plus years experience in the HVAC industry. When I did testing down in Florida, we actually tested around 30 algorithms at the time on troubleshooting. We have over 40 now. There was no way that I could beat the iManifold as far as the diagnostic went, because it was pulling in the data faster and analyzing it faster than I could. It was absolutely impossible for me to beat it. So the answer to your question is yes, we can definitely make things go faster, but we'll always have to have technicians that understand how to make good measurements. And then when they see something that's an anomaly, look at the point of measurement location and then be able to ask themselves questions about, is the system design impacting my measurement? Is my place of measurement impacting the final reading? And then also does what the tool told me is wrong make sense to me? I mean, because obviously, the tools are make a technician more productive, but you can't replace a technician. They're always going to be required. Just like your doctor, he can measure your temperature, but somebody's going to have to look at the system as a whole and make sure that the measurements make sense, and that and obviously that the prescription for the repair also makes sense for the symptoms they're seeing.
Mm. Bill, as far as TruTech tools goes, and of course I'm always sending people your way because you are a tool fanatic and you know more about how the tools actually work. So when somebody comes to you and you've got these packages that are like starter packages and, get your blower door and your duct tightness kit, how are you introducing people who do not have any equipment into it? What kind of basic starter packages are you recommending that people get started with? I imagine that it's generally going to include a blower door. And then when people want to graduate to the next level up, what do you kind of recommend for them at that point to start experimenting with?
Well, first to credit, Jim was my business partner at TruTech up through this year, so he was really foundational in the development of the company and our approach, which we carry forward, since he's changed and moved positions. But you're right. It's a blower door. It's the air leakage testing. It's kind of the forgotten parameter when you get that appliance fixation that Jim was talking about. From there, I think the most logical thing I see next a lot of times is the thermal imager. To use a thermal imager during the course of a blower door evaluation, and to guide you into locations and get that bulk assessment where that energy transfer, heat loss, or heat gain is going on during the blower door test, so those target areas for infiltration can then be addressed.
Awesome. I was on a site going out to test one fan. I traveled halfway across the state just to test this one fan for a code compliance thing. I got out there, set up my pitot tube, which is a pretty difficult little piece of equipment, and ran the test, and the data came back wrong, and I immediately, even though I'm the guy who wrote the book on the freaking test that most people are using, I assumed that my test equipment was wrong, or that I was doing something wrong. And in fact, I ran the test with 3 different pieces of equipment, and finally we realized that the fan was installed backwards. So if somebody who is as confident with the test tools as I am can say immediately, oh, no, there's no way my diagnostic stuff must be broken. How often are you seeing that happen out in the field where people just assume like, oh, I got a weird reading, my equipment is not working?
What time is it? Because that happens about every hour of the day. It takes to go, and that hits home right now with the iManifold because we have shipped thousands of iManifolds out, and when you initially ship a product out, you want to get obviously satisfy your customers, and if we had anything we thought was wrong, we'd bring the product back in immediately for repair or to look at it. And we have only had, out of the ones that have come back, only 2 failures that we would deem mechanical failures or something on our end that was actually wrong. And the rest of them were, and what we've diagnosed over the phone, have been customer misapplication, misunderstanding, misuse of the product. And this happens over and over and over and over again. And I think Bill will tell you at TruTech, and I'll tell you here, that the majority of our day is spent educating customers on how to make measurements when it comes to technical support, because they simply immediately blame the product when it's really the process that is at fault.
Yeah, I think going along with that, you should question everything, and also know where your resources are. If it's the manufacturer, if it's the distributor, if it's a handbook, if it's the Home Performance Diagnostics book, to go back and to dig into your resources and find out if the answer may lie therein. There was one situation when I was with Testo where people were saying the Testo combustion analyzers were all off. They were not reading carbon monoxide when they were introduced in the same stack as a competitive brand. What it turned out to be was that the competitive brand was missing a filter that cross-interferes with carbon monoxide. That's a gas called nitric oxide. If you don't have that filter, your analyzer actually measures a combination of nitric oxide and carbon monoxide. So there was actually very little CO in the situation. We had to go about proving that and wrote a white paper, and we saw a lot of these filters at TruTech. Jim's very familiar with this situation. It's one of the keystone points when we do our combustion training, is we talk about these cross interference and try to make people, educate them, make them smarter about the work they're doing.
Is there movement in the manufacturers? Sometimes I doubt that the manufacturers actually are connected with how people are going to use their products, current company aside. I think that it would be really helpful if the manufacturers came up with some real quick way to do a double check on the equipment, just to make sure, like, to bump a carbon monoxide monitor before you start using it in a stack, just to make sure that it actually is reading something that's normal. Is that something that you think is ever going to happen?
In the personal safety monitor industry, that term bump test is actually used. They do it on a daily basis. This is when life and limb is at stake. However, when you talk about those kind of things, you're involving cost of material and cost of time, and you have to weigh that against the performance, the measurement that you're going to get. So it's a tough thing. I could see someone doing it, but then they're going to have to charge higher rates to do their work.
And
Jim, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd say the other challenge that we see is there, especially in the instrumentation industry, is many of the manufacturers are electronic specialists, instrumentation specialists, but not application specialists. You got to realize that depending on who you call for your technical support, if you were to call some manufacturers, they can tell you intimately how their instrument operates, but they cannot tell you at all how to use that in a practical application. So, in other words, you may have a manufacturer that manufactures manometers, but he can't tell you how to traverse a duct and measure static pressure. And it's interesting when you go over to like Europe. One of the things that working with Testo, I went over to Europe and had an opportunity to talk to their one of their principals over to school over there. And in Europe, they require everybody to become a measurement specialist before they're allowed to practice in the trade. And that's not necessarily the case here, where we hand somebody tools and a business card, and the next day they're in business and they're making measurements, not knowing exactly maybe what they're making those measurements for. And it's, so I think that's one of the challenges that you're going to see out there when you talk about manufacturers themselves, is that we're getting to a point, especially with digital instrumentation, that it's critical that manufacturers take a more active role in understanding the application, so that they make sure that when the product is put into practical use, that you do get a good measurement out of it. And I think that's a challenge we've seen all along. And even when we worked at when Bill and I worked at Testo, and he was talking about the NOx filters, is here a manufacturer had thought very well through the process to make sure that in application that they got a good measurement, but it was never effectively relayed to the U.S. market. And then here we are questioning the output of the unit because we're comparing two units together. And that's always another challenge, is when you talk about a reference measurement, is having a reference, an accurate field reference that you can use in the field, but also to apply that reference correctly. Because when you're talking about things like measuring humidity, it becomes very dependent upon the temperature. So you can't necessarily do things easily in the field like we can in the lab, and that's one of the biggest challenges we're going to run across in the future when it comes to determining if our tools are accurate in outputting the results we anticipate.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for your thoughts. Thank you for your work, and thank you for talking with us today.
All right. Thanks, Corbett.
Bill Spohn is the owner and president of TruTech Tools, and James Bergmann is the director of product development at Stride Tool.
A rising tide lifts all boats. Fall Fast Track.